And that's what they call a traffic jam. Well, hello. You'd never think that you were a 45-minute walk away from the city center of one of Italy's biggest cities and one of Europe's greatest capitals. Hi, my name's Brandon. I work for Through Eternity, and I have done for over a decade. And this evening, I'm going to be sharing with you one of my favorite parts, if not my favorite part of Rome, the Via Appia Antica, the old Appian Way. This is the main road that used to go out, the ancient road that departed the city of Rome 2,000 years ago. In fact, it was built in 312 BC, so 331 years old this year. And it went all the way from the very center of Rome all the way to the east coast of Italy and was nearly perfectly straight the entire way. But what's really charming is not how revolutionary that was to create a road, but instead how old and ancient it still seems. I mean, where in the world will you, other than here in Rome, will you see a bunch of goats climbing over the concrete ruins of a Republican-era tomb? And I mean that. That's what we're looking at. That's what these guys are clambering over. There's this low stone wall on the left, but what they're actually putting their hooves on right here is actually Roman concrete, and this is the core of a tomb, just the structural core, the rest of which would have been lined with marble. And yet here they are. You know, none of these guys is older than 10, 15 years old, but they and their families have been making the same trek from one pasture ground to another for the past who knows how many hundreds or even thousands of years. So if you're just joining us, here we are on the Via Appia. I'm going to start here kind of out towards well, not the end of it, because, well, it ends on the other side of Italy in a town called Brindisi, ancient Brindisium. But I don't want to go any further down the road because I don't want to get, blocked off by, rammed by one of these guys. Rammed being the appropriate term. But we're going to be starting out southeast of Rome and making our way down towards the city center. Watch out, goats, because you'll see it's not just a goat road. It's also a modern road. but they know what they're. I haven't seen a shepherd. I've been sitting here about 25 minutes. There's nobody here. These guys just know their own way, and honestly, it looks like they don't necessarily know when to stop. So amazingly, we're here, again, I walked here in 45 minutes or so, and I live right by the Colosseum, and yet there's this little slice of the countryside that's left for us within jogging distance. People come and bring their bikes out here. It's a really easy way to spend like a casual afternoon or a morning in Rome. I love bringing a picnic in the morning, and you kind of walk out to the end and then grab lunch. Alternatively, come out around this time, bring yourself a bottle of wine with a friend, and just sit on one of the old tombs. But the reason it's preserved so well is simply that when they were developing modern Rome, this bit already had stuff on it. There were all of these old ancestral land holdings around this ancient road, and so they couldn't turn it into strip malls and apartment complexes. So modern Rome kind of expanded around it, leaving this beautiful green space kind of nestled, not in the heart of, but accessible from the heart of the city. So imagine yourself 2,000 years ago, you've been on vacation, as many Romans were in the month of August, down south around the Bay of Naples, and you've made your way back home. It's about a 3 or 4 day journey from Naples to Rome by foot and by carriage. So we're on the final stretch of the journey. And as you start to get into the city center, you're no longer seeing countryside, not the countryside that not real countryside, because now we are surrounded by structures. Because this via, this road was lined with farms, it was lined with country estates, but it was also lined with tombs, because the Romans had an ancient law dating to the very origin of their state, of their civilization, saying that you are not allowed to bury or cremate the dead within the walls of the city. Well, if you want your tomb to be visible outside of the city, where do people go? On the roads. And therefore, all of the roads leading out of the city of Rome became lined with these kind of avenues of tombs. There's a particular beautiful one right here. Take a few steps back to get the whole bulk of it in. This huge circular mausoleum. You can see it has a square base, which then extends up into this circular rotunda, in which would have been buried a whole family. And that's a concrete core, but again, none of that concrete would have been visible, all completely covered in marble. And actually, I probably shouldn't say this on the internet, but during the lockdown, when we weren't allowed to be outside, one of my favorite places to be outside without being outside officially was to come out in the Via Appia and have a seat right here in the back entrance of this family mausoleum. But honestly, this is really my favorite part of the day to be here. The light is just perfect. We're really lucky here. Today is the 1st of September. Usually pretty brutal, and this year it was exceptionally brutal in terms of the humidity and the heat. Because the gods play tricks on men, on the 31st of August came this horrific rainstorm that just cooled everything down, and now the weather is just idyllic. Part of the joy of coming through here is you just have all of these old Latin inscriptions. Lucius Aurelius Glabra, the freedman, was buried here along with his noble wife. As I was saying, this was the first of the great Roman highways. The Roman poet Statius called it Longarum Regina Viarum, the queen of the long roads. And it started this program of military expansion, first across the Italian peninsula and then further, and was part of this massive road network that the imperial state constructed in order to dominate all of Europe. At the end, the total length, not just of this road, but of all the imperial highways in the Roman Empire, was 250,000 miles. Now, I looked it up today. The whole U.S. interstate highway system is like 49,000 miles. So the Romans, I'm not talking about every road, I'm talking about the like imperially maintained roads. Their highway system was 5 times bigger than the interstate highway system of the United States. And they needed this because they didn't have telephones, they didn't have internet. If they wanted to communicate with their people, with their soldiers, with their deputies across the empire, they needed to send a letter on a horse, and it needed to get there fast. So they had these roads that were incredibly straight, incredibly level, and incredibly well maintained in order that the flow of information could just, echo out from Rome. When they say all roads lead from Rome, or really all roads lead to Rome, this is the kind of road they're talking about. Now, the other thing that the Appia is famous for, other than its tombs, are these trees. And I saw somebody in the comments talking about these trees. These are what are called umbrella pines. And they're called umbrella pines for a pretty obvious reason. They've got a long, narrow trunk that just kind of balloons outwards at the top in the shape of an umbrella. And these are very typical of this part of the Mediterranean. And in fact, there's a beautiful almost a symphony, a classical music symphony called The Pines of Rome by an Italian composer named Respighi. And each movement of the symphony is the pine trees, these same pine trees, but in a different neighborhood of Rome. And the big triumphant finale is the pines on the Via Appia. Now, these become a little bit historically relevant thanks to an author named Pliny the Younger. He was a little boy in the year 79 AD when Mount Vesuvius erupted. And he happened to be staying with his uncle, who was also named Pliny. We call his uncle Pliny the Elder. And Pliny the Elder went off to save people from the volcano, and little Pliny the Younger had to stay home and do his Greek homework. And years later, someone wrote him a letter and said, "Hey, I heard we're there on the Bay of Naples when Vesuvius erupted. What did it look like?" And Pliny said, I was a little boy, but I still remember it very clearly. I remember it was like a big black umbrella pine had grown out the summit of the mountain. And so whenever I look at one of these trees, I just think of Mount Vesuvius and this. You can all just imagine this like very forceful eruption of material that goes straight up, that starts to dissipate at the top because of all the winds. Now, where we are, all these little square roadstones, that's modern. But here and there, you get the road. And believe it or not, cars still drive over it. This is durable material. And as we get further down, we're going to see bigger and bigger stretches as we get towards the city. The kind of stone in Roman they call Celex. It's kind of strong volcanic stone that was specially chosen for its durability. But they didn't just put a hard stone and leave it and call it a day. Roman road engineering is like the ancient equivalent of the glass on your iPhone. It's dozens of layers of different materials, each there for tensile strength or durability. The whole thing was special. It's always highest right in the center and sloped down towards the edges, for the simple reason that you don't want big puddles in your road when people are marching down it. And so they're always like a little bit, and even today you can kind of see there's a little bend towards the center, although I must imagine that's a modern thing, the appearance. They also had a roadbed, first of sand and then gravel, just to help with the draining. And really, these were not for, they're obviously not for cars. They weren't even really for, horse-drawn carriages or chariots or anything. That's really like luxury territory. These were roads with a purpose, and that purpose was military. We're talking about tens, sometimes up to 80 or 90,000 men, all marching 8 to 10 shoulder to shoulder down this road. They originally built it in 312 because they were fighting a war quite distant at that time from where they from the capital, against what they call the Samnites. These were a rough hill tribe living in the mountains in what we now think of as being like Apulia. The Romans describe them as being really unshaven and really kind of uncouth. But we have no idea if that's true because they didn't leave us their side of the story. But either way, for the Romans, these were a people that needed to be conquered and bent to the knee. The only problem was their territory was south across a big swamp, and they kept on finding that whenever they wanted to reinforce their troops, whenever they wanted to do some kind of sneak attack, the Romans would always get caught in the swamps, and the only way they could fight the Samnites on their own home territory was to build the opposite of a swamp, this perfect, always dry, always passable road. This is the one little bit of modernity we're going to have a look at tonight. So, an ancient Roman highway built in 312 BC. If you're just joining us, this is our Through Eternity's walk down the Via Appia. Built in 312 BC, originally for the Samnite War, a war fought within Italy, but eventually, only a few decades later, it gets extended all the way from Rome to Brindisium, which is modern-day Brindisi. That's in the, well, it's not the heel of the boot. Yeah, it's the heel of the foot inside the boot. So kind of like, not all the way in the southeast tip of Italy, but a bit further north. And that was the main port for sending troops to Greece. This is the road that the Roman soldiers took when they were going out, not just to conquer a bunch of, hillbilly Samnites, but when they were going out to conquer the Athenians, the Spartans, the Thebans. This is the road that Pompey the Great took when Julius Caesar marched on Rome and Pompey decided it would be a head out of town and regroup. It's also the same road that Julius Caesar took with his troops to chase Pompey up. And as they walk down this road, again, you're constantly approached, or you are constantly approaching and confronted by tombs. Now, as I said, most of the marble of in the Middle Ages, but some of them are still left here. Now, to be honest with you, the bit in the middle with all the portraits, this is a plaster reproduction. The real one is in a museum in the center of Rome because it can't be outside in the rain and the erosion all the time. But they've done a very high quality reconstruction of what this tomb looked like, and all the other bits, the basement, the little inscription on the side, all of that is original. And this is really, you have to imagine all of it being covered in marble, but this is what a Roman tomb looked like. A little gable, like a house, because this was Domus Mortuorum, the house of the dead, and then a little window where all the different inhabitants were shown. And so you have at the center the husband and wife. We know that their name was Hilarus because there used to be an inscription on the front that labeled them. And here they're doing, this is the closest you get to a good conjugal like smooch in the Roman world. They never showed art. They show what we call the Junctio Dextrarum, the joining of the right hands. You'd give your wife a hearty handshake with your right hand and show her that you loved her. And then on the left and the right, we have a younger woman with a kind of little beehive hairdo, and on the right, and these are presumably the son and daughter of this little family tomb. And it's unclear from the current evidence whether they died young, and that's why they're all shown here today, or maybe they just kind of got put in early because their parents wanted to pay for a nice family photo, and the young guy was kind of just stuck being present for it. You can kind of see a family resemblance between these guys. And he's making this very classic Roman gesture of holding his toga with his right hand to sort of demonstrate his citizenship. Now, next to it, there's a much older tomb that predates these kind of innovations in portraiture, something done in a much rougher kind of stone, a local stone, peperino tuffa. And this is a very loose volcanic rock, and you can see the abrasion is just terrible, but they've borrowed all of these Greek ideas of having these half man, half goat figures carrying these garlands of flowers. And it does kind of look like a little Parthenon almost, with these little, what you call dentils coming down. So it's a weird thing. You have to imagine yourself being a Roman soldier walking down this road, going off to fight for your country and fight for your life. And on the one hand, you're confronted by all of these tombs, a little reminder that, oh geez, I'm going off to war, possibly to die. But at the same time, you're confronted by all of these memorials in the literal sense of memory. And these are all the memorials of people who have died for their, died as Romans, who have perhaps died for their country. And I like to think that this was quite an inspiring moment, walking down Appia the opposite way from where we're going. Having said that, I think it would have been a much nicer experience to be the soldier returning from battle and seeing all of these tombs and saying, hey ancestors, I think I did you proud, but also I'm going back to see my family now. Yeah, and someone just commented it's reminiscent to the tombs outside of Pompeii. It's exactly the same thing in the sense of both Pompeii and Rome had these same burial laws. The difference is that Pompeii is so much better preserved. You have to imagine that in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, if you wanted marble, you knew that people were buried on the old Via Appia, and so you just came out here, and what do you know? There's already a nice road for bringing your wagon out here to cart all of this marble away. So we actually use the tombs of Pompeii to help reconstruct what the tombs of Rome looked like, because the ones in Rome are unfortunately, that's one of the better preserved ones I just shared with you. But actually, we're coming up to one of my favorites here. Thank you. Let the cyclists by. The cyclists don't like going on the roads because they're a little bit too bumpy, as you can imagine. Here's a section we're starting in Rome where the actual ancient road is better preserved, and you can see the little square stones of the modern road surface coexisting with these big blocks of the ancient road surface, and worn into it you can see the tracks of the wagon wheels. There's a big one there, here's another one here, and those are the furrows left by hundreds of years of wheeled traffic, every wagon that passes just wearing away 0.5 millimeter at a time of the stone surface, and, just wearing it completely smooth. Now we stop here, as I say, at one of my favorite little tombs, the tomb of the Rabbi. And you've got a little family group. It says Gaius Rabirius, whose last name, or whose kind of nickname was Hermodorus, and then his wife, Rabiria Damaris. And then there's another woman who doesn't share a name with them at all. It says her name was Usia, and that she was the first priestess of Isis. Now, it's kind of weird, because usually all these people have the same name. Again, some of this is original. You can actually make out here where that little line where the marble at the bottom ends, and then the kind of replacement at the top begins. But the stuff at the center is a perfect copy of the monument that originally sat here. And what's so interesting about this is that the woman on the right, she lived about 100 years after the man and woman on the left. And in fact, we know this partly because her name is so weird, but also, look how small her head is. She's like this little tiny pinhead compared to this couple on the left. And the assumption is that this used to be somebody else completely. Maybe the son or the daughter of the couple who paid for this. Later, this somebody came by and said, you know what? I can't afford my own tomb, or maybe she was a long-lost descendant and wanted to be included somehow, but she took the old portrait of the son or daughter who had been here previously and had a sculptor redo the head to be her, to change the identity and to do a little bit of reuse. And the ultimate proof for that is, if you look at her name plaque, it's indented because they shave off all of the stone of whoever was here before. So they took this poor young deceased guy, obliterated his name, did away with his head, and now she's part of this kind of reconstructed family group. I can't even think of a modern equivalent of this. It would be like going through and cutting out the faces on somebody's old family photos and sticking your own face in. And the reason I think that's so beautiful, and why I think it's so, not beautiful so much as evocative, is that shows how these tombs were not simply creations of their day, but that they had a life that extended beyond them for hundreds and indeed thousands of years. And even in the ancient world, you have somebody who looks at something that is 150 years old and says, I'm gonna buy that, I'm gonna find a way to put my face on it. And here we are walking through, having a different but kind of resonant experience, because every generation has rediscovered the Appia in a different way. Kind of little tomb building looks like a temple, and this is very ruined. It's a rectangular building. You can see ruined steps on the front. Only the concrete core is left, but this would have had marble. And at the center, this little sacred room where all of the ashes of the deceased would have been deposited. And I stop here because around the back, where the looters didn't really get to it, it's got some really beautiful brickwork here. And this is something where I don't think this building was ever lined with marble, because it's just, the brick is so great. And here you have this little capital, this little column, a pilaster, and this little cornice at the top, this little crown to the whole building, all done just in brick and terracotta. And here the sun is just hitting it beautifully. And you can see the brick itself is of incredibly high quality. And this would have just been a thing to look at by itself without being covered with anything more precious than just common brickwork. I see a few people commenting about how blissfully peaceful it is right now. And you might say, oh, that's because of COVID. You might say, oh, that's because it's still kind of towards the end of summer. It's like this all the time. It is absolutely never crowded. You have the locals, because there are people who live on the Via Appia. I was so jealous of them during the lockdown because this was where they got to do their exercise. And you have people from the center of Rome who come out to do a bike ride, a little jog. But honestly, it's something that is really off the... I mean, I know it's on the list of things to do in Rome, but tourists never seem to really come out here. And maybe it's just the fact that it's so big that you just kind of spill, people end up spreading out a little bit. But either way, I've never been I've never seen at the same time, I've never been in a position where I can see more than 10 people at the same time, 6 people way out in the distance away from me, 6 people way out in the distance behind me. Here's a great example of why the Romans needed to engineer their roads so well. Here, the Italians have been maintaining it to the standard that Appius Claudius, the guy who founded this road, would have expected. Imagine having to trod through that as a Roman soldier and then walk the next 200 miles in soggy boots. Now, the guy who built this road is Appius Claudius Caecus. He was a major politician in the 4th century BC. Now, just to put that in context a little bit, Julius Caesar, the phase of Roman history that we're all really familiar with, is the 1st century BC. So even for Romans of Julius Caesar and Cicero's day, we're talking about kind of ancient history, the equivalent to us of the generation of the American founding fathers or the British prime ministers of, the age of expansion. Think about William Pitt the Younger. So people who, even for the Romans, seemed a bit old. And Appius Claudius Caecus, he ended up being elected to a very important office in Rome, an office called the censor. And this was a very important, if somewhat... It's an odd thing. They had a very important job, but they were not in charge. Their job was to update the list of who was a citizen. And, of course, we think about this, in the U.S., we're in election year right now. It's very important to know who is a citizen, who should be able to vote, who cannot vote, who gets the benefits and the rights of being a citizen and who does not. And this was the job of the censor, and he had the right to strike somebody off the list of who was a citizen. And that is where we get the modern English word censorship from this ancient Roman office, this elected office, the censorship. And the censorship had a very unique quality in Roman political life. Most Roman offices only lasted 1 year. The Romans were really paranoid about anybody trying to take control through some kind of tyranny or monarchy. They made sure that their elected officials only lasted 1 year, except for the census. The census happened every 5 years, and therefore the censor, the person whose job it was to do the census, had to be in power for 5 years. Now, why is that relevant to a road? Well, Appius Claudius knew that the regular politicians who were only lasting 1 year, they could never do any kind of big public works project like this. They would promise it when they were running for election, and then they get busy with other stuff, or they get corrupted or whatever, and it would never get built. So even though the censor was not really in charge of building roads, he built it. He also built an aqueduct. The first Roman aqueduct, also named after him. The road, the Via Appia, is named after Appius, and the aqueduct was called the Aqua Appia, the Appian waters. Okay, we've seen bikers, we've seen goats, This is another great thing. There's an equestrian club nearby. And he'll be in Greece in just 3 or 4 days. Now, if you're just joining us, we're still here on the Via Appia Antica, the old Appian Way, the oldest highway in the Roman world, the original, the queen of roads. Yesterday, I had a big plan to walk the Via Appia. Not all of it, not the whole length to the other side of Italy, but there's a town in the Castelli Romani called Ariccia, famous for its porchetta, this roast pork dish. Well, it's an amazing sandwich of this roast pork with fennel and spices. It's incredible. And I thought, okay, if I go out to Ariccia and have lunch, how long will it take me to walk back? Ariccia was the first major stop on the Via Appia, and it is, I checked, a 6-hour walk. And I had these incredible plans of going out yesterday and walking back just to do one little section, but a long section, to get an impression for what it would have been like to be a Roman soldier. But then it started raining, and unlike Roman soldiers, I'm a huge wimp, so I stayed at home. But it is totally possible to get to the next major town, and this is a town that was a major town in antiquity as it is today, just by walking straight down a single road. Rob, does the Francesca come down the Appia, or is it a different route? I don't want to stop here because this guy's having a break on this old stone bench, but there's this beautiful inscription that just says, it says here, sister and brother together with their parents, brought together at an early age by cruel fate. Just this old Latin funerary text, the kind of thing you would put on your tomb, just lamenting how, the passing of time. So I just got a question from Mel Elliott, who asks, what's the name of these trees? If you're just joining us, these are the iconic trees of the Via Appia. You find them all around Rome and really all around this part of Italy, but they're called umbrella pines. And I know it sounds weird that we think of pine trees as being, cone-shaped. They grow naturally like this. There's no I mean, they do have, what do you call them, arborists who will come out and just maintain the health of the trees, but naturally they will just shed all of their lower branches and start reaching upwards towards the sky like this. I always think they look kind of like those African baobab trees, but just the kind of super skinny supermodel equivalent of them. And of course, they're called umbrella pines because they've got this big canopy and they are excellent in the summer heat. And would you believe it? On the side of the road, nothing more than an ancient Roman bus stop. How genius were these Romans? 2,000 years ago, a place to sit while you wait for your chariot, a canopy to keep the sun off your head. Of course, I'm completely joking. This is another tomb, but I have definitely sat there to get a break from the sun multiple times. And yeah, I just always think that this has the form, a classic form of a bus stop. Now we're coming up to for me, the absolute highlight of the whole Via Appia, which is weird because I'm an ancient historian, I work as an archaeologist, I love ancient things, and yet what I love more than anything else is a little bit of modernity that has come onto this place. And this is the house that I want to live in. It is incredible. I don't know who lives there. I don't know how many generations the family has had it. But here, precisely on the ancient Roman highway of the Via Appia Antica, is this amazing little cottage. Version of Snow White. It's just absolutely to die for. Going up close to somebody's private residence, but framing their door, and you can see the whole structure is made out of stones salvaged from the ruins. But not just the rough kind of stones, beautiful carved bits of architecture. And here, the little doorpost made out of a marble pilaster. And I'm not going to knock on their door because they have their street number and their motto, Beata Solitudo, blessed solitude. And that's pretty cool. But then also right here, these letters, GRPXXI, this is from a tomb inscription. And it says, it's a boundary marker laying out how big the plot was for the tomb. And it says that it is, Pe stands for pedes, like podiatry, feet, and 21 feet, feet deep. So they've got their own little 20th century graffiti, and then an ancient Roman inscription from the 1st century BC. And then all of this stuff. That is the life. So now we've arrived at the section that is basically all ancient. We've already been walking on part of the road that is mainly modern with a few scraps of ancient roadstones. This is all ancient roadstones. Now, the descriptions that we have from ancient sources say that these stones used to fit so well together that it didn't look like they were built together or put together. It looked like they grew together. And if you've ever been to, some of the medieval towns with old walls where all of the stones fit together so perfectly, that must have been what this looked like originally. It's just that time and hundreds of years of repaving have made it a bit more, let's say, treacherous. So again, the cyclists really I really can't keep this camera steady because I'm tottering here. The cyclists hate going down the center. They always go down the sides because it's just the bumpiest thing. But all the descriptions we have from the ancient world suggest that this thing would have just been smooth sailing the entire way. And we're not sure whether that's because they just found the right stones and laid them together with a really good fit, or, as some scholars have suggested, they actually put some kind of cement in between the cracks of the stones so that it would have been an absolute perfect fit. Now, I showed you a circular tomb earlier. Here's another one. These all date from the late 1st century BC or 1st century AD. And the mausoleum, they always have their entrance on the back, partly because on the front you want to have more room for portraits or signage, more advertising. And of course, not all the regular people are going to be allowed to come inside the tomb. The families would have. They would have come out. There were several holidays throughout the Roman calendar, one called the Parentalia, the Festival of the Parents, where you would have come out and given little sacrifices to your deceased ancestors. And like most of these mausolea, this one has the entrance at the back too. Here it is. Here. Thankfully blocked off so that all the ghosts or whatever animals have decided to live there are not coming back. But what I love about this one is that you have the entrance to the mausoleum directly opposite the entrance to the lucky person who gets to live in front of it. And the mausoleum, the circular mausoleum, ends up being this little cul-de-sac, the center of a private cul-de-sac for this family who lives out in the Via Appia. And look, they've got their trash cans set out for collection right by this 2,000-year-old tomb. It was probably a really fancy and really lovely holiday, the Parentalia, this festival of the parents. Because anybody who was anybody had a family member buried out here on the Via Appia. Maybe they even knew that they were destined to be buried out here as well. And everybody came out and they brought a picnic. And you didn't go crying or sobbing to your family's tomb. You went out with your whole family on a sunny day and actually had a barbecue. You cooked food there. We know that many tombs had little kitchens attached to them so that people could prepare the meal. Some tombs actually had gardens attached to them. In fact, not some tombs, it was probably a majority of tombs because you've got this nice little bit of country property. So even on a day when it's not one of these ancestor festivals, you might have come out here and hung out with your ancestors anyway because you were going to check on your tomatoes. And in America, we've got communal gardens. I saw we have some people joining us from the UK. Think about an allotment. That's which for Americans is a very typical UK communal garden where you've got your little plot of land and you go there regularly to have a beer and to grow your vegetables. The Romans were coming out here on the weekends and growing their vegetables too. The only difference was their little plot of land was next to the tomb of their ancestors. And one of the most brilliant things that we have surviving, in my opinion, surviving from the ancient world, is a joke told by none other than the Emperor Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. And this joke comes to us from a late 4th century BC text in which a bunch of guys are sitting around a dinner table telling stories. And one guy says, "Hey, you know who was really good at telling jokes? The Emperor Augustus." And then proceeds to list something like 100 different jokes that Augustus told when he was alive. And one of those jokes was about coming back to Rome along the Via Appia and passing by a tomb, probably not too different from this one, and seeing a man working on his garden. And Augustus says to the guy sitting next to him, and remember, this is the Emperor Augustus. Augustus says, "Hey, now that's what I call cultivating the memory of your ancestors." Pause for applause. It's good to know that a man who ruled over an empire stretching from France to, or Spain to Arabia knew how to do a good pun as well. If you're thinking of coming to Rome and want to come out to the Via Appia, it's a wonderful way to spend 3 or 4 hours. And my recommendation is to come either first thing in the morning, as soon as you can. Really, the earlier the better. If you can manage to wake up super early, it's just the most spectacular and splendid atmosphere. Otherwise, coming around this time is not bad. You know, the kind of hour before sunset. Sunset right now is 8:20 p.m. I have no idea what time it is, but we're, you know, an hour and a bit before then. Partly because there's less people, but also because there's less sun. And although the Romans have done a very good job of leaving us these trees to shade us, I would never want to come out here at noon. Something else that is out here that can easily be paired with a walk down the Appia, the old road itself, are all the catacombs. These are the Christian mass cemeteries built underground, and they are another reason, in addition to the archaeological material of this road, another reason why this whole area was never modernized, because the catacombs were so deep and so like an anthill in so excavated. There was hardly any dirt down there. They could never build on top of it, simply because no building could, the underlying dirt couldn't support any kind of structure. So those add to the immensity of this big archaeological park. And so you can come out here, walk around, have a little picnic, and then visit a catacomb. And actually, it's a great pairing in the summer because the catacomb is totally cool and sunless, and will be a nice respite from being outdoors in the Mediterranean sun. For that reason, we're not going to walk all the way back into Rome, in part because the bit immediately towards the city is kind of not nice. There's not enough sidewalk, and you end up being kind of pressed against cars. I usually will take a bus kind of part of the way, just not to save time, just to skip that bit where there's too much traffic. So we're not going to be walking all the way back, but also there's a really nice cafe out here, and given how nice it is tonight, I'm going to stop when we get there, leave you guys, and have a nice glass of wine or a Negroni. So my other recommendation, if you're not going to come here first thing in the morning, is to come out here at 2 hours before sunset, walk around for an hour and a bit, and then sit and have yourself an aperitivo. And that, for me, is the perfect Roman evening. It's even better if it starts... Any evening that starts with goats and ends with Negroni is perfect. And if you're not able to join us here in Italy physically, I was just talking about the catacombs. I know that my friend Thomas has been working on a virtual tour of the catacombs. which is actually fantastic because when you're there, there's so much that because it is dark and moist and poorly lit, you can't see the art really well, and he's got some really fantastic photos to show you all of these wall paintings and frescoes from the very origins of Christian art. Of course, what it doesn't have is the damp and the darkness, which you either have to be here for in person or kind of recreate back home, which doesn't sound like very much fun at all. Yeah, head to the website and check that out. Now, because the catacombs are out here, the Via Appia has also, for the longest time, had a very deep connection with the Christian faith. Because it was thought for the longest time this was a place where people hid from persecutions, although that is no longer something that even the church believes. But it was from the very earliest days of the church where members of the fledgling Christian community were buried. In fact, at the catacombs of San Callisto, we have the actual tombs of some of the earliest popes. In fact, we have written on the wall in stone the first time the word pope is ever used in any language, and of course in Latin. And all of that, the stories of the Christian martyrs, postdates the most important Christian story of the Via Appia, because this is the road that St. Peter takes when he's on his way out of prison. As some of you may have read already, St. Peter is imprisoned for the crime of being a Christian. He is rescued by angels sent by God to free him from imprisonment under the Romans, a subject that Raphael paints with great delicacy and beauty in the apartments that he paints for the Pope in the Vatican Palace. And St. Peter, freed from prison, able to go his own way, he heads down the Via Appia because that is the fastest way out of Rome and the fastest way back to his homeland in the East Mediterranean, in the Holy Land. And on his way there, he's making his way as quick as he can, the direct opposite way of how we're walking. And he comes across a guy who looks a bit familiar. And it was Jesus Christ, which was very confusing to St. Peter because he had seen Jesus crucified years earlier in the Holy Land. And Peter gets very white in the face, and Christ asks him, "Quo vadis?" Oh, sorry, I missed the complete. Peter says to Christ, "Quo vadis?" But where are you going? In Latin, where are you going, Jesus? And Jesus says to Peter, "I am going to Rome to be crucified a second time." And then this ethereal vision of Christ walks towards Rome and disappears into the distance. And here Peter knew that this was a vision that should direct his own life. And he himself turned around and walked back the same direction we're going, over the very same kind of stones. So Quo Vadis now is best known for this big blockbuster. They call them Swords and Sandals epics from the 1950s and 60s. And Quo Vadis is one of the best of them. So there is a point that is farther than we'll walk tonight, known as Quo Vadis, an important pilgrimage point where Peter met Christ.
Abbiamo in Celex.
Banu.
All right, if you are just joining us, this is Through Eternity Walks, live to you from Rome. My name's Brandon Green. I'm a PhD candidate at Princeton University and a longtime guide for Through Eternity here in Rome. And we are walking all the way back to Rome along the oldest highway in Europe, the Via Appia Antica, the old Appian Way. Just imagine this thing, which is the size of a 4-story building. All that's left is the core made of concrete, but none of that would have been visible to the viewer. This would have been a luxury tomb covered in huge black blocks of marble. I just saw a question in the comments about whether the Apostle Paul would also have been going down this road. I can't think offhand of any major stories involving Paul and the Via Appia. If anybody knows some, then slip them into the comments. Having said that, this is the road from, where was Paul before this? In Ephesus. He would have made his way to Rome along this road. The fastest way to get to Rome from the Near East, unless you could afford to take a ship the whole way, was to march through Macedonia along another imperial road called the Via Ignatia. So Paul would have made his way first along the Ignatian Road, and then taken a boat straight from Macedonia to Brindisium, from Brindisium to Rome along the Via Appia the entire way. I was in a church recently, right near the Roman Forum. It's called Santa Francesca Romana, also known as Santa Maria Nova, and it's a church, a very important church that's right by the Colosseum, but hardly gets any visitors, and so it's a real calm little island, and among the hustle and bustle of the city. Here's another nice farmhouse made out of. Oh, actually, I can't pass this by. Another one of my favorite modern structures. Not somewhere I necessarily want to live, but you can see this entire house. Is built into one of those ancient tombs, just like the one we just saw, one which in big blocks of marble. And the marble got stolen, but the concrete core remained, and somebody in the Middle Ages hollowed it out and turned it into a residence, and it's got these little tiny windows. Anyway, I was saying about this church near the Forum, Santa Maria Nova, or Santa Francesca Romana, there is a piece of stone, one of these big Roman roadstones, just like the ones we see here, that Peter knelt upon when he was confronting the false magician, the false prophet Simon Magus. And they have it set into the wall with these two huge divots into it. And I would never have known it was there. It's one of those reasons it's good to know Latin, because there was a big medieval inscription next to it, or not medieval, but a Renaissance inscription next to it saying in Latin, this is the stone from this story. And really, really powerful, and really a church that nobody ever visits. Just as this is a beautiful part of Rome that nobody has a chance to visit. Now, as you can tell, we're still on the ancient Appian Way, but we're getting a bit further away from the truly untouched bits, the bits with the ancient roads and all the tombs. And there's tombs that go along, but now we're in the land of wealthy estates, these kind of big regal homes, the kind of place that rents itself out for tens of thousands of euros for a wedding. But there's one more tomb that I was hoping to get to. So once we get through this I hate to say this modern tract, because all these homes are still a couple hundred years old, and the estates are much older.
Ma io poi conto mi sono fatto già prima.
No, perché tu sapevi che questo ti piaceva e quindi ti sentivi. Era pure una bella seconda.
Yeah, there are parrots out here, Rob. All right, we're coming up to the last. I mean, for me, it's one of the. I mean, for everyone, it's really one of the highlights of the Via Appia. But before we get there, thank you so much for everybody for joining me here. Again, my name's Brandon. My day job is writing my PhD. Talking about my PhD to all of you wonderful people. I'm one of the many inspired and inspiring through eternity guides, and all through the summer, we've been offering these little glimpses into Rome, just as a reminder to all of you that Rome is still here and still waiting, and a reminder to all of us that we want to be back outside talking about it, because between you and me, my roommate is tired. Caesar. If you are feeling Italy sick, if you are yearning to get back, I encourage you to start dreaming, because as Rick Steves, the great Rick Steves, said in an interview not too long ago, we have never been in the travel planning business. We have been in the building business, and certainly I always think of myself in that sense. And if you really want a little bit of Italy, we offer, in addition to these little Facebook events, we have these virtual tours at this stage, over rehearsed, beautiful encounters with spaces in Rome, in Paris, in Florence, in Venice, in Naples, where you will be part of a small group and have the opportunity to not just learn about a beautiful site, but then to talk about a real expert, talk about it with a real expert afterwards. I'm still coming up with my tour of the Capitoline museums. I mentioned already Thomas's forthcoming Catacombs tour, but we also have tours of St. Peter's Basilica, of the Vatican, of the Roman Forum and the Colosseum. All of these places which are technically open now, but sadly very much closed to most of us. And I don't know how much business this poor guy is going to get tonight. I don't know why. I always think of goats walking over ancient concrete being much more romantic than modern cars going over ancient road pavings. See, this guy's worried about his suspension, so he's got one wheel up on the modern sidewalk just to give it a little bit more. Make it. But certainly I know if you guys have sat through 30 minutes of some guy walking down a street, you must really love Italy and really love travel. And I know you must be aching to get out and to get back. And all I can say is that those of us here are aching to have you, because it's just such a pleasure to talk about these things. All of things, the sites, the objects, the paintings, the statues, they don't exist unless they have a spark to animate them and an eye to look at them. And certainly myself, I can't wait for Rome to reopen to the public in the broadest possible sense, if only because I can't wait to see the glimmer in somebody's eye when they see the Pantheon for the first time. when you've lived here for so long, you start to, it gets a bit old hat, and you never want the Pantheon to seem old, and I never want the Via Appia to seem old. I always feel that spark when I come here myself. All right. And we're coming up now to the best preserved of all the Appia, and one of the most interesting, the tomb of Kakilia Matala. Kakilia Matala was a very important woman in the political world of the 1st century BC. Her husband was consul, the chief magistrate of the Roman Republic, equivalent to the Prime Minister of England or the President of the United States. And her father, who had also been consul, was a man. All right, sorry about that. For those of you who are still with me, you should be back now and seeing perfect timing with the golden hour sunlight landing on the tomb of Kakilia Matala. So all those circular tombs that I was saying earlier, all those circular tombs that earlier was the one where all the marble is still on. I say marble, technically it's travertine, which will be familiar to any of you who have done a kitchen reno in the past few years. So it's kind of a high quality limestone, low quality marble, but either way you can see that none of the concrete was visible, and she was buried inside. And it's not like you can see the body, but what you can see is this billboard that says Kakilia Quinti Cretici Filia Marco Filio Crassi. So she is Kakilia Metella, the daughter of Quintus Creticus, and then the wife of Crassus. So Crassus was a member of what we call the First Triumvirate, the alliance between Julius Caesar and 2 other men to take control of the Roman Republic without the Republic even knowing. And his daughter, who was also an important politician, was buried here. Now it looks a little bit like a castle today, and that's because they did turn it into a castle. All that rough brown stone at the top is a fortification from just after the year 1300, where they added onto this tomb a barracks and a gatehouse. Here you can see all of that structure added to the Middle Ages. And across the way, also the Church of St. Nicholas. Sorry for the poor reception here, guys. It's silly that the worst reception on the whole Via Appia is this place with the museum on it. Either way,